Okay, welcome everybody. Bonvenon al Chiwi. I will continue in English today. And thank you for being here. And thank you to Stefan for being my guardian angel of the chat today. So today I will tell you something about the social linguistics of Esperanto. It's really an introduction. I struggled a bit in preparing this class because, as sometimes happens, I had to select the material in order to have really an introductory trajectory for you. So let's say the title is Who are the Esperanto speakers? Because this, let's say, is what happens when you speak about Esperanto to the people who doesn't know anything about that, and they are just curious about who is speaking Esperanto and why. So let's start from the basics. So the most frequent and actually the most difficult question that people speaking or studying Esperanto receive is how many people speak Esperanto. Let me have a quotation from my inaugural lecture here in Amsterdam from 2015. This is a taxonomy of Esperanto speakers, and this is the English version. And I used a circle model like the one by Krachu for word Englishes. So you have at the core more or less 1,000 family speakers. Hello. And this is the internal cycle. Then you have 10,000 language activists. That means people who are not only using the language actively per se, but also they are paying the fees, they have some responsibilities, secretary, president, editor-in-chief of journals, all these things. Then you have 100,000 marginal speakers. They are more passive, they're not really involved in, let's say, cultivating the language and its culture. And then this is from 2015, it was 1 million people having contact. Of course, these numbers are completely approximate, just for giving the scale. The last number should be completely multiplied by 5 because of the Duolingo phenomenon, especially after 2020. But are the Duolingo learners of Esperanto Esperantists? This is also, or Esperanto speakers, this can also be a question, you know. So why it is difficult? If we ask ourselves how many people speak Spanish or how many people speak, if you want, English or French or other big languages in the world, not only counting native speakers, this question is almost impossible to answer. I will come back to the notion of native speaker about the situation of Esperanto afterwards, but just to tell you that it's not so easy to count because there is no Esperanto state, there is no territory, clear territory. I will come back to that in a minute. But that is the point. That's why it is always, let's say, honest, transparent, and scientifically, let's say, sound to tell people that it is difficult to answer this, and you can have some gross estimates. Then people who exaggerate in one way or the other, but this is completely normal. Of course, you can also say that Esperanto is a lesser used language. I don't say it's a minority language, because minority language has a specific definition. I will come back on that, but it is a kind of lesser used language, which is a kind of broader term about languages which are not, let's say, developing a state bar from their own and things like that. So the first thing to say is that all Esperanto speakers are plurilingual. Plurilingual means multilingual on an individual level. There is no monolingual speaker of Esperanto, and there will never be. So this is also interesting, because in all cases of plurilingualism, the proficiency of the 2 or more languages, it's not equal. On some domains it's higher, on some domains it's lower, on literacy can be higher, on the family domain can be higher, on the formal domain can be higher or lower, and all these things. And this depends on many factors. And one of the factors is the main language of the society surrounding the speaker. In the case of Esperanto, this society is quite, let's say, volatile, not ephemeral, volatile, meaning that it is made and remade all the time when an Esperanto gathering is formed. So, especially in the week during the Universala Congresso, World Esperanto Congress, or the Internazia Junulara Congress, International Youth Congress, this is very strong, but then it should be, let's say, put away again. So one of the things is that the language linguistic landscape is shaped. So you put sticks on Esperanto name on the places during that week, wherever you are. And this is also something that is very typical and peculiar too. As you can see here in this portal to show general things about Esperanto, you can see that Esperanto speakers like to have their information in many languages, including languages which are not national languages. You can see here Occitan, Luxembourgish, and others. So, also, the second important point is that Esperanto is never the strongest language in the repertoire. Wherever you are, whenever it is, because even if you really are, let's say, a gis host Esperantista, an Esperantist back to the bone, okay, you want to speak Esperanto at the most. In any case, for survival, you have to be in another society most of the time. So this is also very important. And here I want to introduce to you the concept of contested language. This is from a chapter I published in 2021, and in which I argued, I argued that Esperanto is partially contested. It's not a contested language in completely, but has some partial contestation. What is language contestation? That happens when a language is not considered a language, but just a jargon, a slang, something, a dialect, or something, a patois, something that is not exactly language, something that is not expressive as language, because the language is not recognized. So this happens to minority languages which are not recognized anywhere, and in general, and sometimes languages that are just recognized in a weak way. So this is also something that we have to take into account. Using Esperanto is a language choice. So it is never given. Even in the case of the denaskuloj. Denaskuloj is an Esperanto word. De, nask, ul, o. The preposition, nask, verbal root, ul, suffix that means someone with a quality, and o is noun, which means someone who comes from the birth, literally. It is, let's say, the translation adaptation of a native speaker. This screenshot is from a song of a musical made by the TEIO, the Worldwide Youth Association, which is just called Denaskulo, and it's very interesting that the text, we have no time to delve into that, of course. But the point is that it's an ideological term, meaning I prefer to speak about Esperanto family speakers, because they're not really native speakers in the strict sense. The idea, the notion of native speakerness comes along with the notion of monolingual nation state from Romanticism, European Romanticism. And that's why bilingualism started to be considered suspicious. Before nation states, there were the big empires, right? The Tsarist Empire, the Ottomans, the Austrian-Hungarian empires in Europe, and they were normally multilingual. Actually, if you have a broader view on the history of humankind, most of European societies, most of the worldwide societies across time and space were multilingual, and individuals were plurilingual. That's the normal state. I mean, monolingual is a handicap. It's something that is really rare in absolute terms, and it is something that was praised just in this angle of the world which is called Europe in the 19th century. The second thing is that there is, when you have a language choice, we will see that there is a language ideology. And in a way or the other, there is always a positive value for going beyond national borders. In the case of Esperanto, Esperanto is called the international language, what does it, or transnational language sometimes. In any case, it's a language which is innerly thought to be spoken by speakers who belong to different nationalities. What does it mean? It may mean many things. One of the traditional things is here. This is a postcard called Militarismo. I will not translate it for you. By Rodo, an Esperantist, alias Ludovic Rodolphe Pissarro. Yes, it is the son of the famous painter. And you can see this mom with a kid who says very proudly to death, "Viam prenis mian viron, sed tiun ci vi neniam havos." You already took my man, but this, my son, you will never have. So one of the things of Esperanto is that it is anti-militarism. I will not call that pacifism. Pacifism is part of that. More in general, Esperanto speakers generally think that talking to the other people instead of shooting to the other people is the right way to communicate together, to live together. Second, more specialized thing, you can have different, let's say, flavors of this going beyond national borders. And one is this very influential and interesting book by Ulrich Matthias, an Esperantist from Germany, who claimed this is the English version of this book written originally in Esperanto and German, then translated in many languages, that Esperanto can unify the Christian churches. So the Catholic, the Protestants, and the Orthodox under one linguistic umbrella. So Esperanto can be the new Latin for the church. This was just a very visionary proposal, and there are some ecumenic Christian Esperantists who support that. Of course, if you are not Christian, you may not support it. So this is why I always say there are Esperanto ideologies at the plural. There is some core, which is called interna ideo, inner idea, this openness and respect for the other people beyond national borders. But what does it mean concretely? It depends on different contexts. Then the third one that I wanted to share with you is the idea supported by this association, Asocio, you can see here from the Esperanto Wikipedia, Europa Esperanto Unio. So Esperanto European Union. The idea that the European Union should have Esperanto as the common language to foster integration and reach the United States of Europe. We can see here la Europa Esperanto Unio estas asocio por antaŭen igi Esperanton en la Europa Unio por igi la Europan Union lingve efika kaj sen diskriminacia. So the European Esperanto Union is an association to foster Esperanto in the European Union, to make the European Union linguistically efficient and without discrimination. So this is generically, okay. And I have chat with Esperantists who are not in Europe. They say we don't want it because by the moment in which Esperanto is adopted by the European Union, we feel discriminated as non-European Esperantists. And actually, they are absolutely right. So there are pros and cons in any choices, of course. So this is also something that we can have, we should take into account. So Esperanto speakers may not be Esperantists. So this is a me. There is quite a subculture of Esperanto memes. Iru merden, go to merde, is very French, okay? And you can see this is it's kind of a cover of Iron Maiden, the heavy metal classic, I should say, band. And you see that their face is the face of Zam. This gives you the idea that sometimes you can find Esperanto speakers who are completely unsatisfied by the Esperanto movement. They do not identify themselves as Esperantists. They say the Esperanto movement is shit, okay? And they are right to say so. I mean, this is freedom of speech and respect of different opinions. But the important point is that they do that in Esperanto. So they are Esperanto speakers. So you have an ideological engagement on one side, is one variable, sociolinguistic variable, and language proficiency is another variable. So you can have at an extreme an Esperanto speaker who says, I'm not, mi ne estas Esperantisto, I'm not an Esperantist. And on the other hand, it's rare, but I have found also people like this, especially for political purposes, people who do not speak Esperanto at all, but they are in favor of Esperanto as being part of the European Union or whatever. So these are the two extremes. In general, if you speak Esperanto, you have a kind of engagement and involvement into the Esperanto idea. We can come back on that, of course, later. Then the other important point that is always true in Esperanto since its beginning is that its intergenerational transmission is mainly outside the family. So that core of 1,000 families is marginal in the case of Esperanto. So normally, spoken languages are transmitted mainly in the family. So I speak the same language that my parents and my grandparents speak. Okay, normally, let's say. In the case of Esperanto, that is not true. That's why the language ideology of Esperanto is so important. Because in a sense, each generation of Esperantists has to reshape the ideology in a way or the other. I can give you an example. When I was in my university student times, it was in the 90s, just the Treaty of Maastricht, so the European Union was new, and we had a lot of hope for a rapid and efficient integration. Because on the other side, on the east, we had the collapse of the USSR. We could not see what will happen at the time. And so I was a European federalist, and it was quite normal. And also, being a nerd and a geek myself, I discovered Esperanto also through Linux, the free software, because you could install Linux in the graphic user interface GNOME and KDE in Esperanto at the time. So the slogan was Libera Lingvo Libera Programmaro, so a free language for a free software. So that was for my generation. Young generation now has different mottos, of course. So, and previously others. So this changes. But the point is that mainly the language is transmitted intergenerationally outside the family. And Esperanto is a non-territorial language. So there is no territory, although there is a geography. So one of the few attempts to have a microstate of Esperanto is in the so-called Neutrala Moresneto. It is in the eastern part of Belgium today, close to in Dutch is the Drielandenpunt, in Esperanto Trilandapunkto, the point in which three countries meet. And the countries today are the Netherlands, Belgium, and Germany. And at the time, so it was around 1908, and this is a long story of Moresnet since the fall of Napoleon. It was 4 points, because one of the points, 4 points, 4 countries on the same point, sorry. One of these was exactly this small piece of land. Another story is about La Insulo della Rosoi, the island, the Rose Island, which there is a terrible film on Netflix, so you can watch it, but you know that's completely historically inaccurate. But there is a very nice documentary made by Italians and then subtitled in Esperanto. You can find on the web now. About the story of this platform in the middle of Adriatic Sea in international waters, where you can have a casino and duty free and so on. And at a certain point, the Italian Navy wanted to bomb it because they have felt it could be a bridge with Yugoslavia on the other side. And so they appealed to the United Nations saying, we are a country, and so we adopt Esperanto for that. It didn't went well. It didn't go well, I would say. And so it ended, but it's a nice story. But these are exceptions. So in general, there is no proper Esperanto territory. So to recap the main part of today, of the basics. We have 8 fundamental sociolinguistic traits that are always valid in case of Esperanto, whatever the situation, whatever the time. All Esperanto speakers are plurilingual. So that means, as a consequence, that they have a complex sense of belonging. So you have to deal with your national identities, if you have more than one, and how to place Esperanto in contrast or in parallel, in comparison with these identities. Answers can vary. Second, Esperanto is never the strongest language in the repertoire, so it is partially contested. That means that you can always see uncertainty, for example, in lexical choices. There was a very nice PhD by, I don't know, I remember now the name it was a PhD in Switzerland about the uncertainty in lexical choices. So this is another thing that sometimes happens, because if you don't have a clear reference outside in the word, you can label that in different ways because you don't have an official name. I give you an example. We have for many, many years the, let's say, opposition between malsanuleio and hospitalo, to call hospital. Why? Because there are no Esperanto hospitals. You cannot walk into a hospital and talk in Esperanto to all the people there. Nurses, medical doctors, and so on. Just doesn't exist. So that's why there was this. Because imagine if you have a territory with Esperanto, there is an institution, a linguistic institution that says this is a hospital, this is a clinic, clinico, or malsanuleio, whatever. Okay, so you choose the right lexical thing. We don't have a right or wrong lexical label. So because we don't have the reference in that side word. Sometimes it's very funny to see textbooks of Esperanto with in completely imaginative situations. I don't know how to make gas with a car in a gas station. That's something which is completely abstract because you don't do it. Simply in Esperanto, you go to congresses, you meet people, you organize events, festivals. Of course, all languages have some, possibly they can say everything. But in concrete, sociolinguistically, languages are more apt to say things that are, let's say, linked to their concrete life. I mean, it's not by chance that in Dutch, it is rare to have proverbs or mottos or idioms with mountains. While on the other side, you have a lot of this kind of thing with water. It's absolutely normal, and nobody complains on that. It's normal because the Netherlands is lowlands. That's the point. It's very straightforward. So the third point is that using Esperanto is a language choice, even for family speakers. What does it mean? That even if you are grown up in a very, very strongly ideologically loaded parents, you have only to speak Esperanto at home, something like that. It may happen. Even there, at a certain point, you become a teenager and you started to open to the world outside your family. And then you have to have your choice. Do you keep the language that you received or not? So it's always a language choice, at least for adulthood, let's say. So even in the case of family speakers, I have interviewed many family speakers, and some of them do not put Esperanto in their curriculum because they do not want during a job interview that all the interview is just about Esperanto, for example, and others who proudly say so just because they want to say to be special and to stand out the other candidates. Both choices are possible. Then there is some positive value to going beyond national borders, whatever this means, and this is always reframed, reshaped all the time, and we will see something about that. And all the across time, but also across space, we not have the time to delve into the reality of Esperanto in Oriental Asia. But I can tell you that, just as a side note, that in Oriental Asia, historically, China, Japan, and Korea were in war or fighting for many centuries. So they, at a certain point, they developed a common book about the history of Oriental Asia, and that book was, the purpose of that book was to present a neutral way of what happened in that area, not taking any side of the three main, let's say, contestant in the area. And it's not by chance that that book was quickly translated into Esperanto. The committee was made by professional historians from Korea, Japan, and China. Esperanto speakerhood does not necessarily entail being an Esperantist. The reverse is possible but rare. So this is another thing that is important to note. And then, as I tell you many times, international transmission is mainly guaranteed outside the family. This also happens, interestingly, completely independently in the case of sign languages, because only a few offsprings, children of deaf people are also deaf. So they're called codas. I had a paper about ideological differences and analogies between Dana Sculoi and codas, made co-author with experts in sign languages and deaf author too. And Esperanto is a non-territorial language, but it has its own geography. What does it mean, the last sentence? This is a sentence that's not mine, but is a sentence by Mark Fettes, who is a researcher, professor in Simon Fraser University in British Columbia and former president of the Universal Esperanto Association, UEA, Universala Esperanto Asocio. And it's very nice formula. Apart from people from France, Boulogne-sur-Mer is a place that is not very well known outside Esperantists. Why? Because it's a small town on the coast close to Calais. But for Esperantists, it's the place of the first World Esperanto Congress, la Unua Esperanto Congresso, which is the foundational myth of the community of practice. I will come back to that. So, for example, in that case, Boulogne-Cemaro is very, very important. Actually, it was Boulogne-sur-Maro, and now it's Boulogne-Cemaro, so we have also a case of archaism here. And eighth fundamental linguistic trait that I'm going to introduce to you now is that since at least 1905, that is the year of the first Esperanto Congress in Bologna, Esperanto is a living spoken language. That means that the 5 key dimensions of language variation hold. We will see that now. This is something that is valid for all living languages, and apologies to the social linguists listening to me now, because this is very, let's say, very fundamental and basic. So one of these dimensions is the diatopic variable across space. For example, in Esperanto, accents vary according to the repertoire. Se mi parolas tiel, tio estas vere itala accento, ĉu ne? I try to mimic the very Italian accent even more than when I speak normal Esperanto. Se mi parolas tie, tio povas esti germana accento. This is more German, and so on and so on. And make fun, not for disrespect, but just to tell you that sociolinguistically, we have a lot of different accents, and there are, let's say, ideas linked to that. Some accents can be more prestigious than others. Then there is the diastratic variable, so the language changes across social classes or strata. This is more important in the past in Esperanto. Now it's not so important, I should say. In the past, we had the working class Esperantists as a separate group who had a slight different language use. If you are, hello, if you are aware of the distinction between uio and io in the country names, so Italuio, Italio for Italy, Franzuio, Franzio for France, and so on. If not, you can ask Dennis Cave during your language proficiency classes. The io form for many decades was considered leftist because that was introduced by Eugenio Lanti, Eugene Adam, the founder of Sennaziezza Socio Tutmonda, SAT, which is the most, let's say, hardcore ideology, a nationalist ideology in leftist Esperantists. And so he has bring that from Ido to Esperanto, inside Esperanto, and that was really a marker on what your ideology is. Now that's not so. This difference does not hold anymore so much. Some poets and some intellectuals use more uyo, so it can be a bit posh to say Esperantujo nowadays, I think. But this is one of the space in which we have no solid knowledge, robust knowledge from a scientific point of view. Diaphasic. So a language can vary and always varies across the formality of the setting, the context. If you are with your friends or comrades or classmates in a cafe and you're just talking, you talk in an informal way. If you are raising your hand and asking questions to the professor in class, I hope you will speak more formally. So I give you an example of the most formal context of Esperanto is la solemna inauguro della Universala Congresso, the solemn opening of the World Esperanto Congress every year, and also the closure of the Congress, in which the president has its speech and representatives of the countries salute greet the participants to the Congress. Then from there you have all the spectrum of informality. Diachronic during time, and of course context. I can give you two different examples that refer to the sound h. You know that in Esperanto you have h and h. H like horo, 1 hour, which is different from oro, which is gold, which is different from horo, which is choir, also choruso. I will come back to that. And is different from coro, which means heart. Okay, this is a minimal more than pair, let's say. And why is from horo to choruso? Because that sound, which is very normal in German, for example, think about Johann Sebastian Bach, this okay, it's not a Dutch one for the Dutch students here, is not very productive. So we say nowadays more monaco instead of monaco for a monk. And in the case of country names or inhabitants' name, we have as an archaism hino for Chinese, to Chino. And when I say Chinese, I mean a Chinese person in this case. So this is really a big change. And another change is Praho, the capital city of Czechia, which is now Prago. So this is very straightforward and uncontested, I will say, a sign of archaism in the case of Esperanto. There are many other variables, of course, especially in the lexicon, vagonaro, traino for train, or something like that. But that will require a complete different course. And then the fifth, but not for this reason less important, dimension of sociolinguistic variation is the diamesic variation. Once upon a time, we told about, we were speaking about written register and spoken register. Nowadays, everything is more complex because when you text in WhatsApp or more probably in Esperanto in Telegram, you do not use the formal writing system. You use an informal writing system. For example, punctuation is different. You have non-standard forms, abbreviations, and so on. Esperanto is no exception in that. So you can find different ways to use the language according to the different media. Now, we pass to the second part of our online lecture about the definition of Esperantists and their community. So I will give some coordinates for a description. The first thing is that all Esperanto speakers, by the end, are new speakers. The idea of new speakerhood is emerging in sociolinguistics to challenge the, let's say, the kingdom of native speakerness, especially in the case of minority languages which are revitalized. So imagine you are a young speaker of a minority language of your choice, and you have been exposed to the language only by your grandparents, because your parents did not want to, no, you don't have to speak that language. No, you have to speak the real language, the national one. Then you grow up and you want to reprise the language of your ancestors for ideological reasons. You are not learning a foreign language, you are learning your language, but you're not proficient in this language as in the national language, which you don't find attached to your personal identity. So you learn a language as if it is foreign in a sense. You reprise, for example, you learn to write down the language. And so what kind of speaker you are? You are a new speaker. So new speakers are different. They can have wide range of language competencies. Their motivations vary a lot. And the ability of communicating in the new language and the access it provides is really different, can vary a lot. Again, if you try to apply the notion of new speakerness to Esperanto, it fits very well. Because by the end, all Esperanto speakers are new speakers. This is my statement, I will say. So this is something that can be contested outside. It's not something that is straightforward like what I said in the first part. In the first part, what I said is really we had 99% of agreement among the scholars. Here, I stand more my point. A language choice is always ideological. So when you deal with Esperanto, you are confronted with the concept of language ideologies, which are representations about nature, structure, and use of linguistic forms in the social world. That's why it's a social linguistic notion. The point is that a language is never only a language. It always entails a culture and a worldview and so on. Esperanto is no exception. But in the case of Esperanto, you have to deal with that. Because especially in the external world, it's artificial, so it's like BASIC or Java or whatever programming language. It's just that. It's aseptic. No, it's not. it's a human phenomenon. Human phenomena are never aseptic. So this is something you have to justify. This is an argument contesting the languagehood or languageness of Esperanto itself. So that is why the social groups attending the linguistic practices of Esperanto are dealing with this, how we can counter contesting that, how can we support the language and so on. This is one of the normal topic in the case of Esperanto. So what is the Esperantistaro? Esperantistaro, aro, set, is the member of an ideology, in this case, Esperanto, the language. So what is the group of Esperantists? Well, it is an image community in the sense of Benedict Anderson in 1983, which was extended. He was talking about nationhood, how the idea of nationality is raised. So image communities are all communities in which you cannot know personally all the members. I am in Amsterdam. I define myself in many ways. One of these is I am an Amsterdammer. Ich bin in Amsterdammer, and when I say so, I'm kind of quoting Kennedy, ich bin ein Berliner. So it's also something, okay, because I'm not originally from here. And the point is that there is a prototypical and stereotypical idea of who an Amsterdammer is. And nobody can know all the Amsterdammers. It's simply impossible, because once you have all the you have done all the thing, there is someone new. This is simply impossible. And this is a matter of scale. So all the human groups that are larger than families are imagined. Think about that. In the case of family members, you can place in the map the relation with the others. And you can, in a way, know up to a certain point, of course, in the tree, you can meet in person, face-to-face, all the members. In the case of an image community, you can't, because it's too large. So this is a good point, starting point, but there is a but. There are so many image communities that it's not very specific for Esperantists. So that's why, even if this definition is correct, for me, is correct but not complete. And that's why I prefer to say that the Esperantists are a community of practice. Community of practice comes from sociology, not from sociolinguistics. It was then adopted into sociolinguistics by Penelope Eckert. In 2006, we have a very nice definition in which she defines a community of practice as a social grouping, not in which share the abstract characteristics, class, gender, or simply co-presence, neighborhood, workplace, but in which of shared practice. So I'm an Amsterdammer because I live in Amsterdam. Co-presence. While I am an Esperantist because I use Esperanto. I speak Esperanto, and I talk about Esperanto in Esperanto. This is something that, to give you a comparison, is also used outside the realm of languages. Think about chess players. How you can define yourself as a chess player. You learn the rules of chess, you play chess, you talk about chess with other chess players. It doesn't matter your passport. It doesn't matter if you are a kid, you can be a kid and be a world champion. Though the age doesn't matter. And your gender also. Actually, one of the sister Polgar from Hungary was very young when she beat Kasparov at the time, the world champion in chess. And now there is a film about that. And she was also trained in Esperanto by the father. So this is also an interesting Esperanto story. Just anecdote to tell you now. But the point is that you have to do something. You have to practice. You have to be part of the community doing stuff. In the case of Esperanto, this stuff is the language. This is the defense. And this, for me, is the point. So this excludes a bit people who claim to be Esperantists, but they do not speak the language. And this, I think, is fair by the end. Because when these people meet an Esperanto speaker, and the Esperanto speaker start to speak with them and say, oh, I'm sorry, I don't speak the language, they are completely excluded immediately. It's not acceptable, because it's kind of cultural appropriation in a way. In the case of Esperanto, all the things that hold for native speakers do not hold. So, the advantage of early acquisition of the language, the fact that native speakers use the language in a somehow different manner compared to non-native speakers, the fact that native speakers are less error-prone, and the fact that native speakers are the sole arbiters of correct usage. These, which are, of course, ideological standpoints, not facts, okay, these do not hold in the case of the Nasculoi. Most of the Nasculoi did not really acquire language at birth, but during in a later stage. Some of them do not consider themselves the Nasculoi because, well, I learned it when I was 6. I started really using the language. Before I was only a passive listener to my parents. So that depends, of course. And they have differently the kind of fluidity in the speech, the pauses, pragmatically. Some of these can be different if they have a high level of their acquisition, but that also holds for non-Denasculoi. That's also the point. So what's the point? For sure, they are not the arbiters of correct usage. So unlike in the case of English, I have a problem in English, I go to a native speaker to ask for proof. In the case of Esperanto speaking, you have a doubt, you go to an expert speaker. Doesn't matter if it's a native speaker or not, so they're not school or not. This really isn't a variable. And on that, I would say that all the literature, scholarly literature on that agrees with me. Then, third and last part, sociolinguistic evolution in a nutshell. The language project dates 1887. This is the cover of the Russian brochure. You can say Doctoro Esperanto was a pseudonym in Cyrillic letters. And the first two words in the you can read here is por Russoi, for Russians. You can see here. So what is this? This is the language project. So we have to distinguish the language project by Zamenhof from the language, the living language. There is a whole scale by Detlef Blanke of the evolution of the language from project to full-fledged language, and among the thousands of projects we have received through the centuries, we may say that only Esperanto has fulfilled all the steps for becoming a full-fledged language. But that started from 1887 as a project. Then the second point was exactly the foundation of community of practice in Boulogne-sur-Mer, 1905. This is a postcard with Alfred Michaud, l'avvocato, the friend of Zamenhof, and Zamenhof himself, Kion disigis ne uno miliaro, tion cunigis Bulonio celmaro. What did separated not 1,000 years, miliaro, this is an archaism, now we say Armilo, and not anymore miliaro, that unified Boulogne, Celmaro, Boulogne-sur-Mer. I will not insist on that, but of course the fact that that was the proof that the language worked in an international setting. I mean, now we are doing that with all these very beautiful digital technologies, but you have to think about 1905. I mean, gathering almost 700 people from more than 20 countries around the world, you were not sure that everything worked. You go there and say saluton and say, okay, I hope they will understand me. For many people, it was the first time speaking the language. And I can tell you, the first time you speak a language, we speak Esperanto with someone else, you will remember that because, oh my gosh, it works. It's something very emotional. I had this experience with the student yesterday that came to the class, the ordinary class I have here, and he is already a potential speaker. And when he went, say, okay, present yourself in Esperanto, prezentu vi. He was a bit panicking, but then he did it and said, oh my gosh, it works. It was the first time he spoke. It was a very touchy moment. Then, the other point is when la fin de siècle, la Belle Époque, ending with the Great War, so the First World War in modern terms, in 1914. So until then, there was a concrete hope for the positivism around, especially Europe, that new technologies, new ideas can foster perpetual peace, like Immanuel Kant has envisioned, and having a war and peace forever. With the First World War, with the chemical weapons, that in exactly 1915, I should say, because until the Christmas of 1914, which they had playing football across the lines between Germany and France, they still was behaving like knights. But then with the chemical weapons, the war changed and was horrified. And you can say that in that moment, positivism was dead, meaning that technologies, ideas can be also used to destroy humanity. And nowadays we can also say the planet, of course. So that was really a big change. Esperanto had to reshape its ideology. They tried in Geneva in 1920 when they had the League of Nations, la Société des Nations, which is the ancestor of the current United Nations. They had this meeting for having Esperanto as a working language. France said no. Of course, ça va sans dire, because at the time French was the diplomatic language. We didn't want to lose the monopoly, but for doing so, as for the votes of the countries around the British influence, let's say, and so they accepted English as a second official language. Bravo. 1 year later, the Senația Socio Tutmonda, the Nationalist Association worldwide, I'm translating literally, I already talked about the Genolanti, was found that in Prague, and 1921 is the year in which USSR became stable and a lot of communist parties were founded across Europe. So you can see here this idea of letting of the proletarians. There are two workers who destroy the border of nationalities and become brothers. So for that idea that is now completely out of fashion, your brother, your sister is the worker on the other factory, is not the bourgeois of your national comrades, compatriots. And that was in Paris. And in 1922, so 1 year later, the center of, let's say, the intellectual development of Esperanto was Budapest, with the review Literatura Mondo. I will talk about that in my course in June, so I will not delve into that now, but I can say now that in that year started to have, let's say, a specific literary register, both for poetry than for prose, and especially as a side sub-group of prose theater. Then another turning point was the Universal Congresso, World Esperanto Congress in Cologne, Köln, in Germany, and yes, it was that Germany. You can see that it was a very terrible moment because the German Esperantists tried to have an impossible agreement with the Nazi party. And what they did at the time and that shaped the organization of the Esperanto movement, they accepted the idea definitely that you can have German Esperantists, Dutch Esperantists, Italian Esperantists, Australian Esperantists, Tanzanian Esperantists, and so on. So you can have a specific Esperanto flavors in national ways, with some exception like la Cataluna asocio, the Catalan Esperantist, or la Scota asocio, the Scottish Esperantist. So it's not only on the national lines or on the state lines, let's say. So it remains complex, but at least at that time, it is a raising of totalitarianism. In a sense, nationalism partly entered Esperanto. I call that semi-nationalism because it's a cultural nationalism. What does it mean? Nationalism has two steps. The first step is to recognize the group as an apart group from the majority. So in the age of the empires, you say, for example, for the Italians, say the Austrians are conquered us, but we are Italians, we are not Austrians. We define ourselves in an image community, so we created this narrative, of course. We have an ancient language, we have our traditions and so on, so we are different. Then, in the case of Italy, we claim our political independence. This is the second step. In the case of Esperanto, you never have the second step. You only have the first one. So that there is a distinct culture, a distinct identity of Esperanto. And this is why I call it semi-nationalism. And I can say that different nationalities, traditions bring different things. I can say that the hymn, La Himno, is based on the poem La Espero, and the flag were brought by the French. If you listen to La Espero, it kind of sounds a bit like La Marseillaise. It's not by chance. But I stop here because otherwise it's too specific. So another point was, of course, during the Second World War, was La Dangera Lingvo. It's a very important, influent book by Ulrich Linz, a German historian. Die gefährliche Sprache, originally in German and in Esperanto, then also translated in English recently, let's say. Dangerous Language, about all the persecutions by Hitler and Stalin. This is from a graphic novel by Dan Mazur, Esperantist. And this means that Esperantists started to be self-conscious as a group of victims. After the war, there was the UNESCO resolution in 1954 in Montevideo. This is a paper of the time from the Netherlands, and the guy there is called Ivo Lapenna. And from that moment, Esperanto was recognized internationally, globally, but not only for the language, but for the movement. That's very important. So the Esperanto movement has values that are similar to the values of UNESCO. Universal education, brotherhood, and so on. I see that my time is almost going to the end, so I will go to the end. And I have to say that one of the hubs of innovation is the Young Esperantist, Tutmondo Esperantista Junulara Organizo, Tejo, and I had a suggested reading by a very influential, I think, anthropologist of Esperanto, Guillermo Fianch. And just to give you a glance, for a sociolinguistic glance, some few lexic innovation come from Tejo circles. In the 70s, the original couchsurfing service was Esperantists, okay, la Passporta Servo. Then couchsurfing copied from the Esperantists, something that not so many people know. Then in the 90s, there was this Gufuyo, that means a cage of owls, literally, a quiet room with light candles, tisanes, teas, unplugged music, and so on. So it's a specific place that now you have to organize because it's tradition, started from the 90s in Esperanto gatherings for the youth. And then in the tenth of the new millennium, there was finally a translation of the English word cool, which is mojosa, from modern junular stila, so in the style of modern youth. Concluding remarks. Esperanto is a complex and unique sociolinguistic phenomenon. You can try to apply frameworks to Esperanto, but beware that most probably that only partially fits. So this is a difficult case study in comparison to the others because it's unique. But on the other hand, if you don't do so, if you don't compare with the others, you risk to be self-referring to the people only. So I have to say, many sources in Esperanto do not take into account different point of views, and this is not good, I think. On the other hand, there are non-Esperanto written sources which do not know anything about the reality of Esperanto inside, and then what happens is that they do not they miss the point completely, and especially and even big names. It's a test bed for the robustness of any conceptual framework in social linguistics, but not only. So you have a framework, you want to test for robustness, it tests, the Esperanto test is hard. If it passes, it's good. It's relatively understudied point, so there is space for fresh research. What is fresh research? Fresh research means that you don't have to read tons of literature before to start saying your word on it, something original, because in many ways Esperanto still needs research, even research from graduate and undergraduate students. So we look forward for your individual papers by June. It's your choice, it's your opportunity for writing something that may last. Then learning the language is essential for understanding the phenomenon. This, I think, this is a 10 point from some anthropologists, and some do not agree, but I am on that party, let's say. I think that if you don't understand the language, you don't understand the phenomenon, in case of linguistic, social linguistic phenomena like Esperanto. So it is it's very important that you follow the classes of Dennis Kiefer, at least to have a good reading capability. And then try to use the language actively in a real setting and in the virtual setting as well. It would be nice if you can speak Esperanto in tour, at least a bit. That will be your opportunity to meet other fluent Esperanto speakers. So why not? Accept the challenge. Thank you for your kind attention. Koran Dankon.